A businessman went into the office and found an inexperienced handyman painting the walls. The handyman was wearing two heavy parkas on a hot summer day. Thinking this was a little strange, the businessman asked the handyman why he was wearing the parkas on such a hot day. The handyman showed him the instructions on the can of paint. They read, "For best results, put on 2 coats." Patty's wife had been watching a fancy cooking show and decided she was going to try out a new recipe, escargot. She sends Patty out to the market and warns him, "Don't stop at the pub on the way home." Well, Patty being Patty, he accidentally pops in for a quick pint. That quick pint turns into a few more, and before he knows it, it's dark and he's heading home, not very steady on his feet. As he stumbles through the gate, the porch light flips on and he sees the front door cracking open. Thinking fast, Patty dumps the bag of escargot on the ground, points to them, and yells, "Come on now, wee lads, we're nearly there." A farmer was sitting at the bar, drowning his sorrows, when a man walked in and asked, "Why are you sitting here drinking on such a beautiful day?" The farmer sighed and said, "Some things you just can't explain." "Well, what happened?" the man asked. The farmer took a deep breath and began his story. "I was milking my cow, and just as I filled the bucket, she kicked it over with her left leg. So I tied her left leg to the post. I sat back down and started milking again. Just as the bucket was almost full, she kicked it over with her right leg. So I tied her right leg to the other post." "Okay, but that's not so bad," the man said. "Then what?" "Well," the farmer continued, "I sat down to milk her again, and just as I filled the bucket, she knocked it over with her tail. I was out of rope, so I took off my belt and tied her tail to the rafter. And right at that moment, my pants fell down, and my wife walked in. Some things you just can't explain." After a long and exhausting day, a young woman finally settled into her seat on the train, hoping for a peaceful ride home. She closed her eyes, ready to drift into some much-needed rest. But her hopes were quickly dashed by the man sitting next to her, who whipped out his phone and began speaking loudly enough for the entire train car to hear. "Hi, sweetheart, it's John. I'm on the train," he announced. "Yes, I know it's 6:30, not 4:30, but I had a long meeting." "No, honey, I wasn't with Kathy from accounts. I was with the boss, I swear." "You're the only one in my life." "Yes, I'm sure, dear." For a solid 15 minutes, the conversation dragged on, his voice dominating the space and testing the patience of everyone around him. Finally, the young woman had enough. She leaned in close to him, then spoke loudly into his phone. "John, darling, hang up and come back to bed already." The train car erupted into laughter, and John's face turned bright red. He hung up instantly, and from that day on, John never made another loud phone call in public. A husband, a doctor, and his wife are having a fight at the breakfast table. Husband gets up in a rage and says, "And you are no good in bed either," and storms out of the house. After some time, he realizes he was nasty and decides to make amends and rings her up. She comes to the phone after many rings, and the irritated husband says, "What took you so long to answer to the phone?" She says, "I was in bed." "In bed this early, doing what?" "Getting a second opinion." A duck walks into a psychiatrist's office. He sits on the couch, and the two stare at each other in silence for a moment. Eventually, the duck says, "Quack!" "Get out of here," yells the psychiatrist. "I won't be ridiculed in my office." The duck travels to another psychiatrist's office. He sits on the couch. The two look at each other in silence for a time. Again, the duck says, "Quack!" "An insult," shouts the psychiatrist. "I'll have you know I was top of my class. Get out." The duck travels to a third psychiatrist. He sits on the couch. They stare at each other for a short while. The psychiatrist says, "You hate your father, you worry about money, and you're lonely." "Finally," says the duck, "those other two quacks were idiots." A man goes to the doctor and says, "Doc, I think my wife is losing her hearing." The doctor replies, "Here's a simple test. Stand at a distance and ask her a question. If she doesn't respond, move a little closer and ask again. Keep doing this until she answers. That way you'll know how bad it is." So the man goes home and decides to try it out. He walks in the door and calls out, "Honey, what's for dinner?" No response. He steps a little closer. "Honey, what's for dinner?" Still nothing. He moves even closer and asks again. No answer. Finally, he's standing right behind her and asks one last time, "Honey, what's for dinner?" She turns around, frustrated, and shouts, "For the 11th time, we're having meatloaf." A psychiatrist was conducting a group therapy session with 3 young mothers and their small children. "You all have obsessions," he observed. To the first mother, he said, "You are obsessed with eating. You've even named your daughter Candy." He turned to the second mom. "Your obsession is money. Again, it manifests itself in your child's name, Penny." At this point, the third mother got up, took her little boy by the hand, and whispered, "Come on, Dick, let's go." A little girl was sitting in church with her mom when she started to look uncomfortable. "Mommy," she whispered, "can we go now?" "No, sweetheart," her mom replied softly. "But I think I'm going to throw up," the girl blurted. Mom leaned over and said, "Okay, then go out the front door and around to the back of the church. There's a bush there." The little girl nodded and hurried off. Just 60 seconds later, she came back and sat down calmly. Her mom looked at her, surprised. "You threw up already?" "Yep," the girl answered proudly. "But how did you get all the way around the church and back so fast?" her mom asked. The little girl smiled and said, "Oh, I didn't go outside, Mommy. They have a box up front that says, 'For the sick.'" An elderly gentleman got a new pair of hearing aids from his doctor. A few weeks later, he came back for a checkup. The doctor said, "Your hearing is perfect now. Your family must be thrilled." The old man smiled and replied, "Well, I haven't actually told them yet. I just sit quietly and listen to all their conversations." He leaned in and added with a wink, "In the past month, I've changed my will 3 times." Fred and Mary got married but couldn't afford a honeymoon, so they spent their first night at Fred's parents' house. The next morning, little Johnny, Fred's kid brother, sat down for breakfast. As he grabbed his backpack, he asked, "Mom, are Fred and Mary up yet?" "No," she replied. Johnny smirked. "Do you know what I think?" His mom cut him off. "I don't want to hear what you think. Just go to school." At lunchtime, Johnny came home and asked again, "Are Fred and Mary up yet?" "No." Johnny grinned. "Do you know what I think?" His mom groaned. "Enough, Johnny. Eat your lunch and get back to school." After school, Johnny walked in and asked one more time, "Are Fred and Mary up yet?" His mom sighed. "Fine, Johnny. What do you think?" Johnny shrugged. "Well, last night, Fred came to my room looking for the Vaseline, and I think I gave him my airplane glue." One evening, a husband thought he'd be cheeky and teased his wife, saying, "Maybe we should start washing your clothes in Slim Fast, might help shave a few inches off your backside." His wife, unimpressed and far from amused, decided she wasn't going to let that comment slide without a little payback. The next morning, as the husband reached into his drawer and pulled out a pair of underwear, a puff of powdery dust filled the air. Confused, he shook them out and muttered, "What the heck is this?" Baffled, he stormed into the bathroom, holding the underwear. "April, why did you put talcum powder in my underwear?" His wife, standing at the sink with a sly grin, turned to him and said, "Oh, sweetheart, that's not talcum powder, it's Miracle Grow." One evening, a husband thought he'd be cheeky and teased his wife, saying, "Maybe we should start washing your clothes in Slim Fast, might help shave a few inches off your backside." His wife, unimpressed and far from amused, decided she wasn't going to let that comment slide without a little payback. The next morning, as the husband reached into his drawer and pulled out a pair of underwear, a puff of powdery dust filled the air. Confused, he shook them out and muttered, "What the heck is this?" Baffled, he stormed into the bathroom, holding the underwear. "April, why did you put talcum powder in my underwear?" His wife, standing at the sink with a sly grin, turned to him and said, "Oh, sweetheart, that's not talcum powder, it's Miracle Grow." A nurse asked a patient to remove his clothing and put on a gown before the doctor's examination. "In front of you?" he asked, looking a bit embarrassed. The nurse smiled kindly. "Don't worry, I'm a professional. I've seen it all." The patient sighed, saying, "You might laugh if you see me." The nurse, wanting to put him at ease, promised, "Of course I won't laugh. In over 20 years, I've never laughed at a patient." Taking her at her word, the patient slowly began to undress. As he did, the nurse caught a quick glimpse and, to her surprise, found it a bit unexpected. Despite her best efforts, a small giggle escaped. Realizing her slip, she quickly apologized. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. I promise it won't happen again. Now, what brings you in today?" With a straight face, the patient replied, "Actually, it's swollen." The nurse couldn't hold back a smile as she excused herself from the room to regain her composure. An arrogant professor boards a plane and finds himself seated next to an elderly gentleman. Mid-flight, the professor, eager to prove his intellectual superiority, turns to the old man and suggests, "Hey, how about a little game?" The old man looks at him, curious, and asks, "What kind of game?" The professor explains, "We take turns asking each other questions. If the other person can't answer, they pay the asker $1. Sound good?" Confident in his own knowledge, the professor is ready to win easily, but the old man simply shakes his head. Not one to give up, the professor sweetens the deal. "If you can't answer, you give me $1. But if I can't answer, I'll give you 10. The old man still declines. The professor, now desperate, raises the stakes. "All right. If I can't answer, I'll give you $100. If you can't, you only give me 1. The old man thinks it over, then finally agrees, with one condition. "I get to go first." The professor nods eagerly, ready to win back his pride. The old man asks, "What has 5 heads, 40 feet, and lives in a bucket?" The professor furrows his brow, puzzled. He thinks long and hard, trying to come up with an answer. Minutes turn into nearly an hour, and finally, defeated, he pulls out his wallet and hands the old man a crisp $100 bill. The professor, unable to contain his curiosity, asks, "All right, so what does have 5 heads, 40 feet, and lives in a bucket?" The old man smiles, shrugs, and hands him $1. "I have no idea." The boss was concerned when one of his best employees didn't show up for work and hadn't called in. Needing to solve a pressing issue, he dialed the employee's home number. A tiny voice answered with a whisper, "Hello?" The boss asked, "Hi, is your daddy home?" "Yes," the little voice whispered. "May I talk to him?" "No," came the hushed reply. Surprised, the boss asked, "Is your mommy home?" "Yes," the child whispered. "Can I speak with her?" Again, the answer was a quiet, "No." Trying to find someone to leave a message with, the boss asked, "Is there anyone else there?" "Yes," the child whispered. "A policeman." Curious and a bit worried, the boss asked, "Can I talk to the policeman?" "No, he's busy," the child whispered. "Busy doing what?" asked the boss. "Talking to Mommy and Daddy and the fireman," came the whispered response. The boss heard a strange noise in the background and asked, "What's that sound?" "A helicopter," the child whispered. Now thoroughly alarmed, the boss demanded, "What is going on over there?" Still whispering, the young voice replied, "The search team just landed a helicopter." The boss, now frantic, asked, "What are they searching for?" With a little giggle, the child replied, "Me?" Two enthusiastic fishermen set off on a long-awaited fishing trip. They go all out, renting everything they could possibly need. Reels, rods, wading suits, a rowboat, a car, and even a cozy cabin in the woods. The whole venture costs them a small fortune. On the first day, they hit the water full of hope and catch nothing. The second day is no better. Same story on the third day. Every day they try their luck, but every day they come up empty-handed. Finally, on the very last day of the trip, one of them manages to catch a single fish. As they're driving home, feeling disappointed and counting up the cost, one fisherman sighs and says, "You know, that one measly fish cost us $1,500. The other one looks over and replies, "Good thing we didn't catch any more." One morning, a husband decided he would surprise his wife by cooking breakfast. He imagined a flawless omelet, golden toast, and perfectly brewed coffee, his culinary masterpiece. As soon as he stepped into the kitchen, though, his wife followed, unable to resist watching his rare attempt at cooking. "Are you sure you want to add that much milk?" she asked, eyebrows raised as he poured a generous splash into the egg mixture. "It's just a little extra fluffiness," he replied, shrugging it off, though he felt the first twinge of doubt. A minute later, she jumped in again. "Oh, wait, don't forget the pepper. Not too much, though. And are you sure about that pan? It's a little big, isn't it?" "I think I got this," he assured her, though his confidence was waning fast. But as he cracked eggs into the pan, she leaned in closer. "Oh, be careful. You're scrambling too fast. The eggs will get rubbery. And don't forget the salt, or it'll be bland," she insisted, now watching his every move. His patience wearing thin, he took a deep breath and replied with a smile, "Sweetheart, would you like to do it?" She threw her hands up and shook her head. No, you're doing great. I'll just stand over here." But her hovering continued, with gasps and little reminders that only added to his pressure. Finally, he paused, exasperated. "Honey, how about I show you what it feels like when I'm trying to fix things around the house and you're watching my every move?" She burst out laughing, realizing the irony. All right, I get it. Go ahead, chef." And as they both laughed, he relaxed, focusing on cooking the perfect breakfast, his way. The sixth-grade teacher asked her students, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Little Johnny raised his hand and said, "I want to be really successful and travel the world. I'll own amazing cars, live in beautiful places, and enjoy life to the fullest." The teacher, slightly surprised but amused, decided to move on and asked another student. "And what about you, Sarah?" she asked. Sarah smiled and replied, "I want to be part of Johnny's adventures." A rather cranky elderly woman was caught shoplifting at a grocery store. From the moment of her arrest, she gave everyone a hard time, from the store manager to the security guard, and even the police officer who took her into custody. She criticized everyone involved at every step. When she appeared before the judge, he asked, "Ma'am, what did you steal?" With a defiant look, she replied, "Just a can of peaches." The judge asked, "Why did you steal it?" She huffed, "I was hungry and didn't have any money with me." The judge thought for a moment and then asked, "How many peaches were in the can?" She snapped back, "9. Why does it matter?" The judge calmly said, "Because I'm going to sentence you to 9 days in jail, 1 day for each peach." Just as the judge was about to conclude, the woman's husband raised his hand and asked if he could say something. The judge nodded. "Yes, sir, go ahead." The husband said with a sigh, "Your Honor, she also took a can of peas." A young man walks nervously into a doctor's office. He fidgets in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. The doctor smiles politely. "What brings you in today?" The man leans forward and whispers, "Doc, I have a bit of a problem." The doctor nods. "All right, go on." The man hesitates, then says, "My penis is too long." The doctor raises an eyebrow. Too long? He asks, trying to stay professional. That's unusual. Can I take a look? The young man nods and drops his pants. The doctor stares for a second, then sighs and says, I think I'll need a second opinion. He calls in his nurse. Can you come take a look at this? The nurse walks in, sees the patient, and after a pause says, Well, I would...